Welcome to another study. This one is Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 31. We're taking on this one a little lower than the angels. So in today's world, there were over 7 billion chances to prove evolution in humans. All failed. Add in animals and you're in the trillions, which is an epic fail. There's nothing at all in the archaeological record to validate even the slightest hint of evolution occurring anywhere in any form of life. The best the record shows is changes within species to adapt to current environmental conditions. Some people call that microevolution, but even that is an inaccurate term. Adaptation would be much better. If evolution were true out of the trillions of life forms that come and go, and with each generation, we would see not a few, but thousands of developments in every generation. But none have occurred. No, not one. At the top of the ladder of species is and always has been man. And every new baby smile is one more nail in evolution's already well-nailed coffin. In the end, a faulty premise equals a faulty conclusion. The order of creation is as it was because it is the way God ordained it to be. On the second half of the sixth day of creation, God created man. Since then, some people have been born as dummies, and some have been born as geniuses. But none have developed according to the evolutionary model. Unusual change does occur, though in certain circumstances. All right, give me a minute. I gotta get my glasses. On the side of that bag. Thank you. Okay, so what we got is we're gonna open up with that introduction. As we've seen over the past 25 years of Genesis, God created from the simplest to the most complex beings in order. First, he created the heavens and the earth. After this, he created the light, then a firmament, and then he divided the waters from the land. After this, he created the grass, herbs, trees, and then the green lights in the heavens. The great lights in the heavens. Then he made the sea creatures and the birds, and after that, the living creatures on the land, cattle and creeping things and beasts of the earth. After all the marvelous beauty, order, and complexity, God had one more thing to create. Everything else was prepared for the arrival of its final participant in the great unfolding drama of the universe in which we live. Our text verse today goes to Psalms chapter 8, verse 3 through 5. Not quite sure how the slides are going to come out. I kind of did them in a dark color. Hopefully it works. If not, sorry about that. But when I consider your heavens, your work, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have ordained, what is man that you are mindful of him? And the son of man that you visit him? For you have made him a little lower than the angels, and you have crowned him with glory and honor. So may God speak to us through his word today, and may his glorious name ever be praised. The first point is the crown of creation. Then God said, let us make man in our image. According to our likeness, let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. That's verse 26. God's final part of the created order was man. Man is the most complex and sophisticated organism in the universe, and even more, man bears God's image. Here, in the first chapter of the Bible, we see another aspect of God that reveals his nature. The account says, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Everything in creation resembles the Creator in a limited way. But the Bible proclaims that man is created in God's image. What does it specifically mean to be created in God's image? Let's review a few ways that we, as God's image bearer, reflect him. Mentally, we have mental powers to deduce things, to search things out, and to act rationally. We have reason, and we have free will. This resembles God's intellect, and anytime we use our mental capacities in a constructive way to invent, write, paint, enjoy, calculate, etc., we reflect God in a way. Second one is morally. We have a sense of righteousness, justice, mercy, truthfulness, etc. And we act on these because they came from God, in whose image we are created. In other words, these moral tenets aren't arbitrary. Instead, when we act in a moral way, we acknowledge that we were created in God's image, and He is the ultimate expression of the morality we display. Even if we don't always make our moral decision correctly, Paul reminds us in Romans chapter 1, when he speaks of the wrath of God, which is directed at us for our incorrect moral thoughts and action. When we exercise our morals in a positive way, we reflect right morals instilled in us by our morally perfect God. Opposing abortion reflects God's image because it protects life created by Him. When we steal, we move away from God's image, which is uprightness and justice. When societies of people write just laws, punish evil, and promote proper behavior, we confirm that a higher standard exists that reflects God's image. When we use our talents in a way that brings Him honor, we reflect His image more perfectly. The third thing is socially. We were created for fellowship by God who understands fellowship. Remember what it said in the verse when we're looking at, let us make man in our image according to our likeness. According to the Bible, there is only one God. But the Bible explains, even in the Old Testament, that within God there is a Godhead. 3 persons and 1 essence. These 3 exist in an eternal harmony and love. The term us in this verse confirms this concept and it also confirms God's social nature. When God created man, He did it in order to fellowship with Him. There was no need to create us because of His goodness, but of His goodness and social nature, He did. This great act of Genesis 1 demonstrates that He is a being who cherishes fellowship. Our fellowship between each other, therefore, reflects God's social qualities. Every time a man marries a woman, or when someone makes a friend, hugs a child, or attends a church, he demonstrates a part of God's image in his life. Not only are we created in God's image, but God said, let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, all over the earth, and every other creepy thing that creeps on the earth. God has given man dominion over the other creatures of the earth. Although these creatures are wonderfully made and are to be cared for by man, they are not on the same level as man. Unfortunately, people have taken the care of animals to an extreme never intended by God. Activist organizations like PETA are looking for animals to be given the same rights as humans and are thus overturning what God decreed in the creation of earth. We as caretakers of God's world have been given the right and the responsibility to manage the animals of the earth. Even in the Bible, during the times of Israel's judges, God acknowledged that animals needed to be kept in check so as not to overrun the people dwelling in the land. We're going to go to Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 20 through 22, which says, moreover, the Lord your God will send the hornet among them, until those who are left, who hide themselves from you, you are destroyed. You shall not be terrified of them. For the Lord your God, the great and awesome God, is among you. And the Lord your God will drive out those nations before you, little by little. You will be unable to destroy them at once, lest the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. In Genesis, as well as elsewhere in the Bible, an animal that takes a man's life is to be destroyed because it kills God's image. And the same is true with man. If a man intentionally kills another man, his life is to be taken because he has killed a person created in God's image. Unfortunately, like PETA, with animals, many liberal thinking people cry out against the execution of criminals who commit capital crime. But the Bible is perfectly clear that bloodshed of a person can only be atoned for by the blood of a person who committed the murder. We reject these laws at our own peril, because they stem not from human governmental laws, but from God's eternal laws based on His image. So here's some marvelous facts about our construction, which God did on the sixth day of creation. They show how beautifully we have been sculpted. Number one is the stomach's digestive acids are strong enough to dissolve zinc. Fortunately for us, though, the cells in the stomach lining renew so quickly that the acids don't have time to dissolve it. Number two is the human bone is as strong as granite in supporting weight. A block of bone the size of a matchbox can support 9 tons. Believe it or not, that's 4 times as much as concrete can support. Number 3, the largest organ in the body is the skin. In an adult man, it covers about 20 square feet. The skin consistently flakes away, and in a lifetime, each person sheds about 40 pounds of skin. Number 4, the average person in America eats 50 tons of food and drinks about 11,000 gallons of liquid during his lifetime. Number 5, each kidney contains 1 million individual filters. They filter out average of around 2.2 pints of blood per minute and expel about 2.5 pints of urine a day. Number 6, a single human blood cell takes only 60 seconds to make a complete circuit of the body. Number 7, the skin on the palm side of our hands and fingers is unique for several reasons. 1, it has no hair. 2, it contains fingerprints completely unique to that individual. The skin will normally have no pigmentation and no ability to tan. It's tough and durable, yet sensitive, and it's anchored down to the bones beneath it through the intermediate layer of fascia. This arrangement keeps the skin of the palm from sliding around like a rubber glove when we use our hands to grip and twist. We could go all day on these amazing facts about the complexity of the human body, which is a form created by an infinitely intelligent being who understood not only how we would end up working, such as being able to see, smell, taste, talk, etc., but giving us things to excite these abilities, such as flowers, smiles, cold showers on a hot day and hot showers on a cold day. He's given us crickets and birds to light our morning hours, and every day He paints a new sunrise and a new sunset into the skies for our enjoyment. We can appreciate all of this and so much more because of the way He formed us. As King David so wisely said in Psalms 139, 13 and 14, says this: For you formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, and I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelously are your works, and that my soul knows very well. In our text verse for today, the psalmist said, you have made him a little lower than the angels. This seems to put us in a lesser category than the angels. But if you go to Hebrews chapter 1, it says this. Hebrews 1, verses 13 and 14. But to which of the angels has He ever said, sit at my right hand, till I make your enemies your footstool? Are they not all ministering spirits sent forth to minister to those who would inherit the salvation? So although we are a little lower than angels, it is the angels who have the job of ministering to the people who inherit salvation. Angels were created, but they are spirits lacking potential. On the other hand, man has potential and is unlimited in an amount of variety. And above all the other potentials that man possesses is the ability to be redeemed. We live in a fallen state in the world, but God has placed angels in our lives to minister to us. When we have come to the point of salvation, from that point on, we can infer that angels are there working in ways we don't even know to guide us in our redemptive walk. So, try to do a poem every study. Some of them are getting harder, some of them are not too bad. But the crown of God's wonderful creation plan is God's image bearer, known as man. Angels tend to his needs unaware, and the domain of earth is under his care. As special as God formed him to be, man turned away from the Creator, you see. And so there is a rift between God and man, and this rift is a vast one that we cannot span. But God did the work to reconcile the two. He sent his Son Jesus, all things to renew. And so again, we can stand in his glorious light because of the Savior who has made all things right. Our second point is male and female. Verse 27 says, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Although this point ought to be obvious and unnecessary, it seems that it is in a confused world that we live in. People can't figure out even the obvious. God created man as man, and God created woman as woman. In an attempt to deny this, modern thinking has taken almost everything to extremes, never intended simply to deny the difference between the sexes. I'm seeing so much here lately about transgender where people are to the point where you can't even call a female a woman or a she. It's so judgmental right now. So despite this, men have qualities that are suited for men, and women have qualities that are suited for women. Neither is better than the other, but both fit what God has created for the purposes he created them. Not only are we physically different, but men and women are mentally different as well. Understanding the differences between men and women is part of understanding our different roles as people, as partners, and as members of the church. A man is never complete without a woman, and a woman is likewise incomplete without a man. But together, the two are made to be one. We'll talk about this more when we get into Genesis 2 in a future study. One more note on this point, though, is that the Bible never diminishes the worth of women. Instead, it exalts them. However, the Bible does note culture distinctions between the sexes, such as the Jewish culture, the Greek culture, etc. Just because culture distinctions are made in no way means that they are to be universally applied. Only when a verse is prescriptive in nature is it to be applied to men and or women. A third point is what God has ordained. Verse 28 goes on and says, then God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Chapter 2 deals more with the personal relationship between a man and a woman, and the subject of marriage is better left until then. However, this verse sets a pattern for physical relationships. God told them, be fruitful and multiply. What this is implying, stated here, is that sex is meant for people of the world, but that it has been ordained to be between a man and a woman. The earth can't be filled with people engaged in homosexuality. Instead, God created us male and female for the purpose of procreation in order to fill the earth. Anything contrary to this, then, is a perversion of what God has ordained. Accounts such as the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah are recorded specifically to deal with the issue of homosexuality. Unfortunately, in order to twist what's written here, homosexual advocates say that what is implied in the Sodom account is that the belligerent and unwelcoming attitude of the people, not homosexuality. But if they would simply complete their reading of the Bible, they'd find that the Bible interprets this passage elsewhere. In Jude, chapter 6, well, actually Jude 6 and 7, but we'll kind of pinpoint this out. It says, and the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day of Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities around them in a similar manner to these, having given themselves over to sexual immorality and gone after strange flesh, and are set forth as an example, suffering the vengeance of eternal fire. As we go on, the law of Moses also gives us insights to this matter. In Leviticus 20:13, it says, if a man lies with a male, and he lies with, if a man lies with a male as he lies with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. And speaking of what is obvious from creation, including interpersonal relationships, Paul says this in the book of Romans. Romans 1:26 and 27 says, for the reason God gave them up to vile passions, for even their women exchanged the natural use for what is against nature. Likewise also men, leaving the natural use of women, burn in their lust for one another. Men with men committing what is shameful, and receiving in themselves the penalty of their error, which was due. So another of God's ordinance that we saw previously is also to mention. In verse 28, when God said that the man is to have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Man has been given ruling authority over the animals of the earth, both for their care and their control. To elevate animal life to the same level as man is actually being dishonor on God's, because God created man in his image. By claiming that animals are comparable to the rights to man, is thus negate every authority of God's established heresy. If animal is at the level of man, and man is the image of God, then that's saying that the animals are at the same level as God. Not so. As a society, it is right to work actively against any attempt to give animal rights beyond the normal care and control that was ordained by God himself. Likewise, it is right for Christians to oppose any and all attempts to normalize homosexual rights and claims within a society. Issues such as these don't mean that we are uncaring about either animals or those who are caught up in homosexuality, but it does mean that we are to hold what God has ordained above what man desires when it's contrary to God's natural laws. In the end, verbal and physical attacks against Christians are only going to increase in the years ahead when we stand against violations of God's ordinances, but choices have to be made and each person has to be determined in advance what is and what isn't acceptable, and then be ready to stand on those principles in the face of harsh criticism and even attack. Our last point is, it was very good. Verse 29 goes on and says, I think it's the last point. Yep. God said, see, I have given you every herb that yields seed, which is the face of the earth, which is on the face of all the earth, and every tree whose fruit yields seed. To you it shall be for food. Also to every beast of the earth, to every bird of the air, and everything that creeps on the earth, in which there is life. I have given every green herb for food. And it was so. Then God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the sixth day. On the sixth day, God created all the beasts of the earth, and he created man, completing his creative effort. These verses then are a reminder of what was available to man to eat. This seems to imply that there was nothing poisonous in the herbs, the grains, or the fruit at that time. Instead, everything was edible to all living creatures, and this is what you'd expect from original creation before sin and death entered the world. After making his pronouncement about the food available for life on earth, God expands on the comment of the previous 5 days, which said it was good. Instead, God says, V'ha tahu ma'ad. And indeed, it was very good. It must have been an immensely splendid and beautiful place before the fall of man. And even after the fall, but before the flood. The world must have been an exceptionally beautiful and life-accommodating state. It will again be this way in the millennial reign of Christ, when God restores much of what was lost so long ago. I want to quote out something that Matthew Henry says. In his commentary on this portion of Scripture, it says, the time when the work was concluded the evening, and the morning were the sixth day. So that in the 6 days God made the world. We are not to think but that God could have made the world in an instant. He that said, let there be light, and let there be light, and there was light, could have said, let there be a world, and there would have been a world. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, as same thing at the resurrection. But Henry says that God could have done everything instantly, but he chose not to do it. But he chose to do it in series for specific reasons. As we noted last week, God created from the least complex to the most complex. And this should inspire us to do the same with our own lives and our own works, to be ever improving at what we do. God also did his works in 6 days to show us a good and proper cycle of living, taking 1 day a week off for rest and relaxation. And also, these 6 days are representative of a greater picture in redemptive history. God concluded his works on the 6th day, and as we'll see in the next study, rested on the 7th. When we analyze the rest of the week, or when we analyze next week, we'll look again at the reason for it. Until then, let's remember that in this world is God's creation, and man was created to dwell in it, to fill it and to subdue it. And to care for it, let's contemplate these aspects of God's plan as we use the water he provides, the food he gives, and the terrain below our feet as we walk the highways and hills of life. Everything we see, feel, smell, taste, hear, and sense is a gift of and from God. And each demonstrates his intelligence, his wisdom, and his love. As the psalmist says, bless the Lord, O my soul. That's all I got for this week. Until next week, God bless.